God's Favorite Idiot is a new series on Netflix created by Ben Falcone and therefore, of course, stars Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone. And I love Melissa McCarthy. I've seen a lot of most of her films by this point, and I think maybe one or two of them didn't appeal to me. So generally speaking, if she's in something, I'm going to enjoy it. And that's actually the case with this one. I wasn't really sure what to expect, and normally I discuss just the first episode when I'm kind of sampling something to see if I would want to continue watching it. And honestly, I had to watch the second episode as well because I just I was curious after the first episode, but I just still wasn't quite sure where it was going or what it was trying to do. So I watched the second episode. So this is kind of discussing the first two episodes, but focusing mostly on the first episode. There are only 8 episodes released, and I'll be honest, I haven't watched it all, but I've gone a little bit further than 2 episodes, and it's really easy to watch. So basically, it's about Emily, whose name was Emily, and she changed it to Amelie, and there's a really quirky little speech about the film Amelie. For whatever reason, I don't personally like that film. It's really weird. I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't, but that's irrelevant. Amelie comes into work one day. She works for some kind of tech startup company, and she tells her colleagues that when she came into work after hours, one of her colleagues was glowing. Yes, exactly. Why was he glowing? I have to say, the special effects, when we see them glowing, it does actually look like Clark is glowing from the inside. I think it's very effectively done. And the first episode is mostly about her in disbelief and trying to convince her colleagues that he was glowing. We, as the audience, as the viewers, know that he was glowing, and we actually see, at the very beginning, the very opening scene, we see why this happened. Or rather, we see what caused it to happen. The why doesn't come until a little bit further into the second episode, and I'm not going to spoil that. But the first episode is mostly her trying to convince her colleagues that this is true, because we as viewers know it's true. And then the second episode, and I'm not going to say too much about this at all, but the second episode basically looks at why. And maybe given the title of the show, you can kind of roughly work out why, but it's not as straightforward as that. And I think this works for two reasons. The first is that Clark and Emily are both really likable protagonists. Clark is the titular idiot, if you like, and he is sweet and quite vulnerable and quite oblivious sometimes. And I really thoroughly enjoyed this character, and I'm very curious to see what the character development is like throughout this episode, throughout the season. Emily is quite likable. She has unlikable personality traits. For example, she does a lot of drugs, which is not the kind of individual I would get on with in real life. She's maybe a bit aloof. She's not very hardworking in her job. But at the same time, she's Melissa McCarthy. She's played by Melissa McCarthy, and she hits all of her comedy markers. And I found her to be very funny and very entertaining. So for me, Emily is generally a really likable, enjoyable character, but sometimes I kind of don't get on with her. But Clark, definitely liked him a lot. As I said, or kind of touched upon there with Emily, it is quite funny. It's kind of the warm, fuzzy, quirky funny rather than laugh out loud. For example, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I would quote, whereas there are other shows like this, not maybe a similar premise, but similar tone of comedy, where actually there are things that I would quote, specific lines that made me laugh out loud. This one's more just about the feeling of the show, and it's comforting, it's inviting, it's quirky, it makes me quite curious. Definitely curious, in fact. I want to know what happens next. It's as simple as that. I think obviously a lot of it is set inside the offices of this company because it's focusing on Emily and her colleagues, Clark being one of her colleagues. Also Frisbee, absolutely love that. Frisbee, played by Steve Mallory, is an individual who is called Frisbee, but he doesn't like to be called Frisbee, which sounds mean. The way I said that, I enjoyed that, but the character and what he brings to it, I thought was quite fun. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure what to expect, but it's Melissa McCarthy, so I knew there would be some pull factors there for me. And I really like it. Yes, set primarily in the offices. Not the most unique setting for a show, but it doesn't matter. We also have some scenes at a bar, at Clark's, is it his father's house or his house? I believe it was his father's house. But we have, some other scenes elsewhere. It's not all set within the walls of the offices. I liked it. I'm curious to see what happens next. I think it's well filmed. The comedy works quite well. The narrative definitely has piqued my interest, and it seems to have a pretty good reception. So in all, it's definitely done something right. Curious to see what happens next. If you've seen it all, or even just the first episode, do let me know what you think of it. So far, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to the rest.